Ever catch yourself donning a hero cape at work? Turns out true leadership isn't about putting out every fire or micromanaging until you burn out. Join me today where we talk about how we swap our firefighter mentality for building fire departments, rethinking what real empowerment looks like, and discover why sometimes the best move is letting others shine. Welcome to We've All Done It, the podcast for leaders who know they've screwed up and are ready to fix it fast. I'm Kimberly Benoit, author, speaker, leadership coach, and Southern girl living outside of Washington, D.C. Here's what I believe. Every leader faces challenges and makes mistakes, but you don't need years of therapy-style coaching to fix them. You need someone to help you figure out what's actually going wrong, make smart adjustments, and get back on track quickly. That's exactly what I do through one-on-one coaching, targeted skill development, and group programs. Every episode of this podcast delivers real talk about common leadership pitfalls, practical strategies for recovery, and no BS guidance to improve how you lead yourself and others every single day. Whether you're here to listen and learn, or ready to work together and make real changes, you are in the right place. Now let's get to today's episode. Welcome back, everybody, to We've All Done It. And today we have a guest that I genuinely am excited about because it's a topic we have not talked about on the show. So today we're going to be joined by Maximus. And I want to make sure I say it correctly. Is it Lih?
Yes.
Awesome. That's what I thought. But brains, sometimes they tell you the wrong thing. But Maximus Lih, he is joining us from out in California. He started his career out at Google and then moved into Google Ventures, working with a lot of startup companies and startup technology. And he's been doing it primarily from the HR side of the business. So he has gotten to see a wild, and I can assume wild, but amazing things. And today we're going to really spend some time talking about something that I think a lot of us have experienced, or many of us have experienced, which is getting into that firefighter problem-solving mentality as a leader, which limits us in being able to actually lead well or to promote in the way we want. So before we jump into the thick of that conversation, I want to say welcome to the show, Maximus.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So did I miss anything? Is there anything fun or exciting about your background that you would like to share that I just did not share?
There's a story people often ask me about how I decided I wanted to do any kind of leadership to begin with, and where did I get that instinct from? And I always end up telling the story of my grandfathers. So my grandfather was an orphan, and he was left in a Buddhist monastery in China. He grew up in a very small town where, because he was an orphan, he was often accused of being dishonest or not having integrity or being lazy, because in a very small town, why else would you be abandoned by your parents if there wasn't something horribly wrong with your heritage in your genes? He wasn't guilty of any of those things, but it really trapped him into a place where he felt like his identity was just being locked into this thing that he didn't feel like he deserved. And so my grandfather ran away, lied about his age to join the military at 16. And, long story short, by the end of his career, he had taught himself to read. He had taught himself to dress impeccably. He had taught himself math and calculus and accounting. And he ended up retiring as a 4-star general in the quartermaster division after World War II.
Wow.
And it's one of the stories that my family, especially on my dad's side, we carry with so much pride, not because of this, cowboy style, look what people can do if they just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But it was always more about, if you find the environments that allow you to thrive and allow you to lean into your potential, is completely different. You will end up in a completely different place. And my grandfather was also very, very clear about, he did not pull himself by his bootstraps. You don't think your way into learning how to read, right? Somebody has to teach you at night after drills and boot camps. And somebody has to say, that's an okay way to spend your time off, to teach this person how to read and to do math and to invest in you. And so we always felt like, as a family, even when we immigrated from China to the US, it was about, how do you find the systems and environments that really allow you to be who you were meant to be? Your own efforts can actually be really hindered if you're not in the right environments. And that's a leadership for me. And so I feel like, oh, I found my way into thinking, as somebody who's really sensitive to environments, how can I be training, equipping, and empowering different leaders to create those environments that allow us all?
That is an incredibly powerful story, simply because that's amazing to have that kind of drive and that much commitment into doing and being better, because that's hard. It is hard to push yourself, especially if you don't have the community around you in that capacity. And I imagine for you, and I appreciate that you tie this back to leadership, but I also think it probably speaks to a lot about how you approach other people and just others as a group, and as not just as a business, but like, how are we helping and supporting each other in general, whether it's professional or personal? I would imagine that has a tremendous impact on how you view the world.
I think so, yeah, because you're just sort of really aware of, oh, here are these things that we can control, and here are these things that we can't control. And then also going into an environment like GV where I saw, 400 companies trying to survive with all of them started with great ideas and people who had enormous talent, who had VP jobs in places that they gave up to live this dream, and only 10, 15, 20% of them survived from stage to stage. So obviously it wasn't about ambition or talent. It was about, like, what does it mean to be set up for success? And what does it mean to actually scale yourself? And what does it mean to actually empower people around you rather than, push them, right? Like, there were so many different nuances that when you put those things together that once again pointed out to, if you zoom out, the things in your peripheral vision do a lot. And once again, the people who hold spaces, this is why I sometimes talk about, right, hero versus host in leadership. The people who can hold space for those systems and environments to really grow actually become the most successful. And that's not something that we like to talk about, because when you're doing the PR winning tour, you kind of talk about like very specific decisions that you made that made somebody into a hero. But that's very rarely the case. But the things that you can zoom out and hold space for, create environments for, those actually are generative spaces that can't be used.
So I think this is a good transition point, because whether it's in a startup environment, or I've seen this happen with leaders, even in large organizations, where, especially if you're moving from kind of an individual contributor into a leadership position, is this idea of a hero mentality or a problem solver mentality. And it's because that idea, that mindset has gotten them to a certain point. But when you're operating as a leader, there's that point where you say, well, you kind of have to kind of step back a bit. You got to figure out how to hold space or create that environment where you're not the solution. So I would love to hear you talk a little bit about, one, how to identify if you're a leader that is stuck in that hero mentality mindset or problem solving. How do you know if that's you, right? Like, if somebody's listening, how do they know I'm in the hero space versus I'm just being a good leader space?
Yeah, I think that those are very human questions, and they have a lot to do with. I almost think of it as like there's identities changes that need to happen as you step into different roles. And I work at the intersection of people and revenue. So when I put my people HR hat on, we often will say like, "Oh crap! Like, did I just promote my best IC top performer into a mediocre manager, and now I don't have both?" And because that training doesn't automatically happen when you're an IC. There's nothing about being a high performing IC that will make you a great manager by default. The two jobs are completely not the same. And so when you get promoted into a role as a leader or a manager, and you start to think like, well, this is what got me successful. I go into any place and I solve a problem within 15 minutes and they love me, and I'm a single point of failure. That makes me indispensable for the company. They wouldn't have made me a leader if they didn't want me to amplify those instincts, right? And then you start to go into your team meetings or your performance management meetings looking for problems to solve. And I think that's always the first clue. If you end your day feeling like, I solved a lot of problems today, or I barely got any work done because all I was doing was solving problems, you're automatically in that firefighter hero mode. and you're not empowering anymore. I was literally just talking about this with a client last week where I said, no, what you have done is you've been so accustomed to going into meeting rooms, strategy rooms, decision-making rooms, being the person who fights for somebody to agree with your idea. You're the persuader, but that's not your role anymore. You're the manager now. They are trying to persuade you. And if you can't make that identity switch, you will go into meetings and you will shut down ideas. And then you will be frustrated and nobody else is coming up with ideas. But it's actually because you haven't made that transition from being the problem solver to being the decider. Right. And so like that's one place where the mindset at the end of the day says so much about how we're operating and what is setting us up for success. And like the thing that once again, right, it was successful all the way until you like took on and said yes to that manager role or that leadership. And then everything is a bit different. So I think that that's one of the first things that I say. The second thing I always say, I had a coach, I did the same thing. When I was at GV, I was fighting to make partner. The portfolio when I started was 80 companies. We touched 40 or 50. And I remember a founder went to the board and said, I am so grateful that Maximus at GV, he treats my problems like they're his problems. And I got the kudos back and I got the bonus back and I was able to make partner. And I just thought, this is what I got to do for every company. And we ended up writing checks to 200, 300 companies. And now I have to be in 80 companies a quarter with one partner, and they just kept saying fail forward. And I was just going crazy because it was impossible to solve every single one of these problems like they were my problems. And there was a coach who basically said, why are you acting like a consultant when you are actually a partner? Why are you acting like a contractor when you're actually a board representative? It's fundamentally a leadership versus a worker, business developer mindset change that you need to go for. And you have to start thinking about things really differently. And so then immediately, that was a real turning point for me as well that I try to pass on because it's true. You get a lot of glory in the hero culture for putting out fires. When you transition from being a firefighter to building fire departments, there's no easy way in our society to give us credit for the fires that don't happen. And that's, once again, that's a leadership thing. I have to figure out a way to give myself credit and reward mechanisms for the fires that never start. And that's a much, much better way to equip and train and multiply and grow my team. And we know this even about the firefighting industry today, right? This is an industry that does incredible heroic work and create trauma and devastation and destruction because of the nature of fires. But if you can do things that actually prevent, fires from starting, that is a much more sustainable, ecologically friendly.
So I'm going to probe this a little bit. So you were there, right? And you got this guidance, right? Hey, stop. These aren't your problems, right? You need to teach to fish, not fish, right? Because it's the same kind of concept, right? Your job is to create other good leaders. So the first time, though, that you started to say, I'm not going to go solve this, can you talk through, like, how did you approach them? Because I'm sure you were met with some resistance, right?
Yeah.
You're changing the rules, you're changing the game. So can you talk about what that resistance looked like? How did you overcome it in such a way that it didn't damage the relationship that you had with the person that now there's that shift taking place?
And once again, when I go back to systems, let's remember that there was nothing inherent. It was a coach that was not my boss, right? That was telling me you need to figure out a different way to scale yourself. And so I right-sized my time. I stopped spending most of my time with the companies that were struggling. And I started spending more time with the companies that were really about to break out into the next ceiling. So I started spending time with high potential portfolio instead of the struggling portfolio. And the explanation that I gave to my board partners was, one, like, no company wants to say, I owe all my success to my investors. That is, zero companies want us to have the glory for solving their problems. In fact, we're going to be much more desirable as board members and investors if we were founder first, started first, and let them get the glory. And then they'd say, oh, you guys really were like great facilitators, or I'm so grateful for the advice, but not you solve my problems like your problems. That's just a different reputational benefit that nobody is trying to do, at scale. So one, understand the incentive systems of where you're going in. Two, right size your time. And then what I would do is say, but as somebody who gets to see all of these playbooks, how can I open source the best ideas into the struggling companies as quickly as possible? And so I was actually the host, right? I was hosting information exchange and transmission in a way that actually gave more glory to my high performers than it ever did to me. I hosted the dinner parties where we were able to get comp information very, very quickly when everybody was figuring that, struggling with the comp survey data being behind by 3 months. Well, I facilitated the dinner party where they just told each other that. I gave them permission. I told them that this would be a safe space, and they did it. And they said, oh yeah, we were able to make so many more hires as a result of this. Did they say, thank you, Maximus, for solving my problem? No, right? They said, we should do more networking dinner parties.
So I love what you're saying. So your message is so when you first did it, it really had to do with your mind shift change first, right? And what I'm hearing you say is you shifted where you spent your time. And it reminded me a great deal of, I don't know if you know her. Her name is Cy Wakeman.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of her ideas is that some people find very controversial is that you should have favorites, but not in the typical sense that we have favorites, but in the idea that you should favor your time with those who are meeting expectation, those who are showing up and excelling and doing the work. Because what many leaders do, which is exactly what you just said, is we put all of our time and effort in our problem performers. So who's getting reinforced are those that are not actually delivering the way they need to deliver. And so it puts us in that posture of wanting to come in and fix, right? But what it does do too is it puts you in that position of helping and feeling good, and because you're still be able to prove you can get it done to some degree. And so I like the idea of one is shifting where you put your time and attention and reinforcing the behavior you really want to see versus reinforcing through your time and attention the behavior that's not helpful and that may actually draw you in more quickly.
Absolutely. Well, and remember, I think that the key is to right size your time. So the goal is not to then say, oh, if you're struggling, then you're out in the cold, right? Like evolution, survival of the fittest, go and do it. I think the mistake is what I've done and many of us do. Oh, this person is struggling. Let's really put them under a microscope because they've lost some trust. I don't think that they are figuring it out. I'm going to watch them really, really closely. And what happens actually is that because of that, both for you and for the person who is struggling, they have now completely had blinders on about the only role model is you, right? It's easier to paralyze somebody when you eliminate the number of role models they have accessible to them because of all of these micromanaging nitpicks. And then for you, now the problems that you're hearing more often and top of mind are not problems that have to do with how we can make everybody better or how we can raise the, maximal, how we can be doing impossible, huge things that are beyond any individual person's capability. The thing that you've spent the time on focusing on is this person's a problem. And that very quickly then becomes not this person has problems, but this person is my problem. And now all of a sudden you're a manager who thinks about your team like problems to solve. That doesn't make them feel empowered. They'll never be able to compete with your IC responsibilities. And you don't even often remember what it's like to be a beginner in that same way, to struggle, because the reason why I was promoted was because I struggled very few things. I was always the high achiever. When you right size that and you say 20% of my time is with people who are struggling, 80% of the time is helping to maximize my high performers or high potential performers, the problems that you have top of mind are much more expansive and generative. And two, you're creating a lot of different role model examples of people who do it differently with no loss of success for the person who is just looking for some path to figure it out. So I think that what happens, once again, it goes back to who gets the credit when they succeed.
Yeah.
Does the person who is struggling get to pat themselves on the back and say, I did it? Or are they going to say, oh, thank goodness for those 15-minute check-ins every day. I barely made it out of my pit for with the hairs on my neck, right? Like one way is never going to make them feel genuinely empowered, but the other way makes everybody feel better about being able to do great things.
Quick announcement. I'm hosting the Power of Your People Leadership Summit on May 12th through the 14th. It's a virtual event for anyone leading teams who wants practical strategies and not just theory. Here's what we're covering: building high-performing teams, creating psychological safety, having difficult conversations, developing talent, driving accountability, and preventing burnout. Basically, everything you need to lead people well in 2026. We've got expert sessions, 3 interactive panels, plus the daily huddle, where you'll connect with other leaders in small groups to tackle real challenges together. Completely free if you join us live. You can also get an all-access pass for $97 for lifetime replays. Register now at poyp26.kimberlyjbenoit.com. That's poyp26.kimberlyjbenoit.com. All right, back to the show. Well, and I also think that there's a couple things in that answer I thought were really smart. One is how quickly you go from I want to address my problem performer, help my problem performer, to I am micromanaging the bejesus out of this human, right? And so not only is it making their world smaller, but it is making you probably not the best version of yourself, because you're looking for, your attention is there all the time. And that for most people, that's actually the culture they want to have. Like, your team wants you to address problem performers, but not at the cost of creating an environment that feels like it's suffocating. And because that's just a pressure, that's just like a pressure chamber, just rarely is good. And you can manage a problem performer well, to your point, without creating that atmosphere. And also just being very clear. I think it requires us as leaders, and I'm own it. I'm like you. I have made massive mistakes in this. I have been I can immediately think of a person. Like, I thought that was what I was supposed to do. Like, they were my problem performer. I was going to meet with them, make sure everything's explicitly written, because HR says if it's not in writing, it didn't happen. And because, you're trying to figure out, how do I protect them? How do I protect myself? You want them to succeed. They're not succeeding. So you can easily find yourself sliding into a very sticky area if you're not careful, right? And I want to be careful here too, because I feel like from a leadership perspective, we put a lot on leaders' plates. Like, I don't want people to feel like what we're talking about now means you have to do more. It's about figuring out how to do the same stuff you're doing, but maybe do it differently. Because you have to address problem behavior one way or the other. Maybe you need to just slightly do it differently. And so in your experience, when you've seen leaders start to make this shift, right, away from that firefighter hero position, or sometimes it's about control too. Like, if you feel like everything is falling apart here, like, you might dig in deeper because it gives you the illusion of control, which I think for some people that's part of it, is they want to feel like they know what's going on, and that's the only way they can do it. But when you start to see people make the shift away from that hero mentality, how do you help them move the emotional part of it, right? We talked about it. So when you have been for many people, like, you're not talking like a year or two, you're talking like a decade, if not more, of they have gotten their value, they have gotten their fulfillment on that of being the expert, on getting that validation when things got done. And now suddenly we're shifting, because part of this is to shift it away from you, in a certain sense, to other people. So how do you help them start, or how have you helped clients do it, to understand of where to get that validation from, since where you've historically gotten it will shift? Yeah. And that's going to be hard for people, I would imagine.
Yeah. And I think that at the end, it's the same challenge for the manager / leader as it is for a high performer on the team or a performer who's struggling on the team. ultimately we have to change our lens away from control into agency. And the two are slightly different because control generally means one person at the top gets to make all the choices and then they better make the right choices. But you feel like a hero because you're carrying the fate of the organization on your back. And agency, and by the way, having a lot of control actually makes you feel less agency because there's so much at stake that it's actually harder to make decisions because you feel like you cannot fail. And then everything that is out of your control that is keeping you from success becomes something that feels very trapping, that feels very, very like overwhelmingly burdensome. It feels really heavy. Agency is the freedom to make choices and then be good enough to fix it, right? That's where agency is like, oh, I can make choices and then those will lead to other choices. And those choices could either be opportunities or pivots, right? And so in the same way, a control mechanism for performance management is you got to do it exactly this way. I built this process factory that spits out successful people. Follow my process factory. You don't get a choice because you got to manage the engine of that factory. And the performer doesn't get a choice because they got to follow the instructions step by step or the IKEA table falls apart. Neither of you have agency in that management scenario, but you also don't get the agency of what you used to have, which is I can pick the most interesting projects to work on for impact because I've earned it through all of the things that I've done in the past. No, now I am forced to work on this project, which is like a person on my team, and I don't like the impact, and I barely feel like we're going to be able to make it to net neutral with all of my time. That doesn't feel like agency either. So I think that that's a big shift. Get away from control and start amplifying agency. And agency could also just mean sitting down with somebody that you no longer feel, is going to be able to make it and say, not, you didn't make the PIP, now I have to let you go. Or in HR speak, right? To say, I am concerned that you have not been able to make the progress that I had really hoped to see by this time, right? I wouldn't be giving you this feedback if I didn't have absolute confidence in your potential. And I want to give you every opportunity to succeed. That's my job as your managers. What do you want to do? Do you want to try with support? Do you want to try to find another place on another team in the company? Or do you want to start thinking about, potentially finding another fit somewhere else? That is also agency, to sitting down and just having that conversation.
I can imagine that there are leaders right now who are listening and who are saying to themselves, this sounds great. Sounds awesome. My organization just went through a riff. I've lost team members. So we're being asked to do the same amount of work with less people, which means I have to do stuff. I'm not in a position where I can just sit and lead. I now am having to have a foot in this world and a foot in this world. I'm having to do more work than just leading my team. So for people who are in that space, because I know quite a few people who are finding themselves there right now, what would you recommend for them, or what guidance would you give them about mindset or approach when you might be in a position where you're having to straddle two worlds?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to keep using the firefighter versus fire department analogy. The firefighter perspective is to think, who are my retention risks? Who can I not afford to lose? Do I need to throw money at this problem? What do I need to do to be able to get out of the fire? And once again, you as the leader or the manager feel incredibly trapped. You have very little control, but you're on the hook to fix this fire, which can be catastrophic in your imagination or end up to be totally fine. Or, so you have to make that change. If you're the firefighter, either you have to say, this is a controlled burn, job market is tough, they're not going to leave. Or, OpenAI is throwing money at people, I'm going to lose my top performers and then I'm going to get fired, right? That is the firefighter mentality. How am I going to fix this problem? I think there is the fire department, right? If we kind of go back to what does a fire department do when it's fire season? All right. What does a fire department do? Well, they find places to de-escalate, places of tension. So the host part of a fire department says, let's have a community meeting where we talk about, right, what has not worked in the past, just so people are not angry all the time, right, when they think about fire season and they're not operating from a place of fear. So we just need to have this conversation. And I need to be very honest about saying, like, I don't have access to that information. I'm in the same boat as you are. I feel just as vulnerable, and I am going to stay because I still believe in this company and because these are some of the best people that I've worked with and I really like you guys. And I think that if we just buckle down, it'll be okay. Maybe that's naive, but that's why I'm still staying here, right? So you have to start from that place. Tell them why you are here. Be the host for that space. Like as a fire chief, right? This is why I believe the fires this year are not going to be out of control like last year. We built these infrastructural supports. The rain was not the same. And then a lot of the places that burned out already burned, right? So this is why I'm more confident. And you kind of lead from that place. And then the second thing is you talk to your highest performers or your highest potential performers and you say to them, right, like, let's be real. I'm going to have to lean in and you guys are the strongest people. We're going to have to carry some of this. What do you need from me to make it sustainable for you? Right. And this is where sometimes as like somebody with HR experience, I go like, we just did the layoff. Take your time off now. Take 3 days off when the dust hasn't settled, because a month from now, it's going to be really hard to be able to spare you to take vacation. This is part of like my leadership protection of you. I'm playing a fire department in this situation because you're going to burn out and it's going to be really tough mid-quarter. Like, take it now. They're not assigning that stuff. And you have that conversation with your highest performers, right? And I think sometimes you go to your struggling performers and you say, it's going to get a lot harder, right? And so once again, this is the best time to go looking for another job if this is what you want to do, because I can still give you a severance right now. Or I could still, like the workload isn't so hard right now, right? Like you make the choice. It's not going to get easier. It's only going to get harder. So what do you want to do? And I think, even with regards to layoffs, you saw people make that change, right? Where instead of saying there are layoffs, and people are trying to come up with lists, the fire department perspective is, I will give you 3 months of severance if you would rather not be here, because it's going to be really hard and something's going to happen. There was less trauma in that arrangement for a very difficult time than there was in a scenario where people were on pins and needles waiting to see whose job was going to be on the chopping block and then getting, a horrible Zoom email or something, right? A Twitter note that said that you were affected. So there's always a fire department way to do it. And I think it is in that order. You have to make the decision first about your own mindset. You have to be really clear about why you are staying or making a decision for your own agency, and then go and pass that agency on to your highest potential performers, and then pass that agency to take care of your struggling performers.
Is this episode hitting a nerve? Are you facing complex people challenges and have tried leadership books, workshops, and the advice from everyone, and somehow it's still not working? Now imagine having a trusted leadership partner who understands your specific challenges and strengths. My one-on-one leadership program provides the support you need with a customized plan. If you'd like to learn more, click on the link in the show notes and book some time with me. I'll explain how it works. Now back to the show.
I mean, at the core of what you're saying here too is you're communicating very clearly and very honestly. And I feel like in all of what we're talking about, even if like you see yourself as a firefighter and you're wanting to shift into it, you're still going to have to communicate some things. You're going to have to talk about what is going to be different. And I think that that's the thing that sometimes gets lost, because when we feel like we're drowning too, feel like sometimes communicating is the hardest thing to do. Mm-hmm. But at the end, and I think your example is absolutely right. And I appreciate the analogy of the firefighting season being that you're in California. I'm originally from Southern Louisiana. Similar idea, right? Like you have to talk about the plan. You have to answer questions honestly and proactively, because you don't have a lot of control. And I think there's an illusion that when you get into leadership, that you are the control. And the truth of it is I think it's more of an illusion than people realize, because it truly is a symbiotic relationship with everything else that's happening in the business. And like, if it's your business, that may be one thing, but if you're a leader within an organization, there's limits to what you can do. And that needs to be communicated appropriately.
I would say
Um,
that there's two different ways that I think about this. One of them is absolutely right. Like, as a leader, as opposed to as an IC gets the luxury of saying, if I do my job, you leave me alone. A leader, the better you do your job, the more people want you to talk to them, to spend time with them. That is a totally opposite, just like behavioral trajectory. But there's also that part of the fire department where, like, you do controlled burns as a fire department to protect against a catastrophe, right? So where are there systems where you can build sandboxes for people to experiment with failure at low risk, so that when the real thing comes, you do it with so much more confidence, muscle memory, and humor? And a great example of this is Stewart at Slack. 2018 was the first like major Slack outage. The systems were off. They had just scaled themselves into breaking their own databases. But Stewart had come from Flickr, and he had started companies before. He knew that at scale, there would sometimes be data center outages. And so they practiced that. And like when it happened, that everybody jumped on customer support. They made jokes about it because it was just not stressful in the same way. And there were so many memes that came out that was like, Slack is down. What are we going to do? We had to send an interim across the office with, Post-its of gifts. How will we ever survive? Slack was the first instance of a product that had a massive outage. And not only did retention not fall, they gained new customers because of the way that they practiced the control burn, because they just gave that. And I think that there are also places like that where like it can be really creative and fun to say, what's the worst thing that can happen? And how can we practice and do drills around that when there are no stakes?
No, I agree with I mean, hurricane preparation, right?
I
Like,
really, right?
there's a whole reason we have contraflow. And for those who know, like there's a whole reason certain things, like I lived through Katrina and we learned
Wow.
that was a really less than ideal.
Yes.
Everything fell apart. I think almost every system broke.
Mhm.
And as a result of that, plans started to be put in place. You start talking about things differently. People respond differently. And I like the idea of having that conversation with your team of like, what's the worst thing that could happen to us? So how do we think of like, how do we plan for that? How do we prepare for that? Whether that's how do we think about prioritization differently? What would we flex? Like, what would our priorities be? And then how would we communicate that? Or again, that allows you to then turn around and have different conversations with your struggling members.
Yeah.
Like, hey, here's where we know there's gaps. Where do you want to go with this? Like, what is how can I help you? What help do you need from me?
Mhm.
So again, you're getting to the point where you're making your team as strong as possible before something hard comes. But you can only do that is if you are managing your time, going right back to the beginning. You've got to know where your time is, and are you being the most productive and the most impactful with where your time is actually focused.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that I know I can speak for a lot of leaders out there. I have had more days than I care to count where I would end the day and say, what did I actually do? Like, I had a list of things to do today. None of that happened. And so I would say that's probably a moment that you need to go sit back and really look at, where did you spend your time? Why was that time there? And what could you have controlled or approached different? Because I feel like so many times we say, well, no, that I didn't have an option. But was there a way that you could have asked for something differently? And I know the psycho terms get thrown around a lot. Did you hold your boundaries? Did you say, hey, this time is protected, and then kept it protected? Or said, hey, I allocated an hour for this. Okay, you only get 15 minutes. This has to, you know what I mean? Like, it has to start with us. It has to start with what standards we are creating, what structures we're creating, and then what do we hold to and how we hold to.
Yeah, absolutely. I tell a lot of my coaching clients, and I have to do this for myself as well, be really clear about what are the things that I can do versus what are the things that only I can do, right? Like those long-term investments that are like only you can do, no one else can do it. You don't often get credit for not doing that or giving up that time to sacrifice for the team to do everything that you can do. I had a situation where somebody went out on mat leave We didn't have a backfill. And my instinct at that time as a firefighter was like, oh, I'll just lean in. I'll be her backfill, right? And, fast forward 1 month, the team was completely out of focus because I wasn't doing the things that I needed to do to drive alignment and focus. I wasn't having the VP conversations that I needed to have because I was doing IC work. And it would actually have been much more useful for me to say, what are the things that only I can do, right? Can I borrow a resource, right? Can I go to our stakeholders and just say, hey, we're not planning to invest in this project for the next 2 months, right? And not make it about how, mat leave is bad for productivity, but we just don't feel like that's going to be a priority that fits with our plans and resources, right? I could have had those conversations, but no, I immediately went into, well, I have IC chops. I can do that. It would take so much stress off of her just to know that there is somebody who's going to take it. And it was not the things that only I can do. So I think that that's also part of how we audit our time as well.
I really like that. And it's because I'm sitting here thinking, because one of the areas, and we haven't touched on this, is if you were a leader that has gotten feedback, you might be captain, right? Like you're only manager level, you're only director level. I feel like what they're saying, but they're not actually saying, is what we're talking about, right? Is that you have not figured out how to make that transition from doer to the leader. So I would encourage anyone who's listening, who maybe has gotten that feedback or feels frustrated because they haven't been able to make that next leap. This is probably your issue right here, is making that mindset leap, and that be not just mindset, but the behavioral leap that follows it. To your point, because if it's only you who can do it, well, why is it only you? That's probably something that needs to be passed down. If it's only you who can do it, then that's a gap right there. We should probably address. But if it's not only you and you're still choosing to do it, then again, coming back to understanding where are you spending your time, and is that where you should be spending your time in effort to become a better leader and lead in the way that you want to. I mean, you need to, in order for your team to grow and candidly for you to grow, because otherwise you have kept yourself. This is as far as you can.
Well, and I would say to leaders, we are entering into an age of AI right now where so many things are changing about the way that productivity is measured, about the way the systems are designed, about whether AI is actually useful or not. And so I'm not worried about having a lot of problems to solve. I think that there are problems aplenty that are coming our way. But if the problem starts with a sense of thriving in crisis, then the solutions that we build are going to come out of fear of loss or anxiety and a desire to survive rather than sustainability. And those are the places where you end up actually creating leaderboards of high performers against each other rather than collective intelligence that makes everybody on the team better. And it starts with, are you setting the example for somebody who scales yourself so that you can actually be solving much more interesting, challenges for the team and see those challenges as opportunities rather than things that drag you down. And I think that is the leadership moment that we're encountering, right? Workforces are becoming more complex than ever. You have 5 generations of people, from those who have never written a complete sentence before, and then they're going to inject robots and AI into the things that actually set goals for how we perform as sales teams, engineering teams. Gosh, right? As a leader, how am I going to actually approach that new era, right? And if I have been operating from a place that says, I'm afraid that this is going to take my job, thank goodness I am now a manager so that I'm not in danger in the same way for the IC work. You start to look around your people and say, is this person going to be replaced by AI? Is this person going to be replaced by AI? I'm annoyed at how much handholding I have to do. You're not empowering people, and you're actually dragging and weighing yourself down. And it's more because of the choices that you've made in your head and not the choices the people who are performing or not performing around you.
So first off, thank you for coming on. This has been great. Before we move into our closing, if there was one final thing you want leaders, the one key nugget here that leaders really need to internalize, take away, think on, act on, what would that be? What would you want to leave?
I remember coming out of a layoff where people were extremely angry because the CEO had told them we were not doing layoffs, and then we ended up doing layoffs. So they felt directly lied to. Like lost, I told them not to do a Q&A, right? But like now we're in this situation. I lost a third of my team. We still needed to deliver. The board was being really hard on us. And I just kind of took a risk. And I said, if there was another, I don't know the information, right? I hope there is not another layoff 2 months from now. If there was another layoff 2 months from now, what can we do? What would that mean? What's the worst thing that could happen? And a person raised their hand and said, if there's going to be another layoff right now and you can't guarantee that there isn't going to be, I'd quit tomorrow. And I just said, I completely understand. This is an at-will state. I think that everybody here is a volunteer because we hire great people and great people have choices. The reason why I'm staying is this. And I hope that you just give me the opportunity to show you that it can be better. And you know what? None of those people ended up quitting because just the release valve of being able to say it out loud and have somebody meet it with like, I understand I'm not taking choices away from you, as opposed to, don't you know what's at stake? I can't believe you will let us down. That would be an act of betrayal. Like none of those defensive things, just like, that's your choice. And I respect that. And, I have choices too. We're all volunteers here. They buckle down much, much more after that conversation than when I was fearful of like, who's thinking about quitting and who's looking on God's door. And I think that's also the thing, right? The fire department says we do control burns. We have the conversation. We don't wait until the worst thing happens and you end up in a much, much better place.
And then you're looking for the fire hydrant because you have no idea where it is.
Right. Yeah.
I just want to point out the one thing you didn't say,
Yeah.
I appreciate, and again, for people out there, you didn't say you were a family.
No.
So the day that lingo stops will be wonderful, because I still think there are companies that still push that messaging. And I would echo what you said. I think the most important thing you can do is ask for people just to say what they're scared of. And then now you know.
Yes.
Right? It's not an assumption. Get the assumptions out in the open. I'd rather deal with real information. I'd rather know who's angry. I'd rather know who's frustrated, what exactly they're frustrated about, because then you can take action with information. You just sit in a pool of anxiety with your assumption. And also you can take action on assumption that is wrong. That's what it was before. So, no, this was great. And so I'm so excited that you talked a little bit about AI, because you are going to be participating in the Power of Your People Leadership Summit in mid-May. And you're going to be talking about AI and how to have people first AI. So you want to plug your session a little bit?
Yeah, I think many people here might be familiar with these buzzwords around AI taking over all of our jobs. And on the other hand, MIT did a report that said despite billions of dollars of investment into AI has actually produced little to no productivity increase. I think it's actually because we're using it in a way that is about AI as minions or tools, as opposed to AI as an empowerment platform. And once again, that is something that I'm seeing played out in playbooks in real time. And it is really, really exciting to talk about the ways that we can really harness that. But, how do we actually use it in a way that makes sense for humans to still exercise the things that we're really good at, which is judgment? And how do we actually allow the tool to be a tool as opposed to an overlord or a ghost or a boogeyman? All of those things are happening because frameworks that have not been broadly shared. And so I'm really excited to be able to open share some of the things that I've learned and get everybody's input on what's working and not working.
Well, if you're interested in learning more about Maximus, check out the show notes. But also, if you want to check out his session, there's going to be a link in the show notes. Please go check it out. Register for the event. It is free. You can listen to him. Thank you so much for your time. I genuinely appreciate you being here.
Yeah, I think people who listen to this podcast are obviously people who are trying to do right by their people and also learning a lot about themselves in the process. And I'm just grateful that I get to be a part of that. Let's do a little better together.
All right, take care.
I've got 2 things before I let you go. 1, if you've ever gotten any value from the show, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps and absolutely makes my day. The second thing is if you have any thoughts you'd like to share with me, please shoot me an email at podcast@KimberlyJBenoit.com. I'd love to hear from you. All right, see you in the next episode.